Hello, everyone. While we're just waiting to set this up, my name is McCallum Kelly1, and I want you to do a thing for me right now. I want you to picture in your mind when I say the word women's rugby. Okay, I want you to keep that picture in your mind, and I'm going to ask you a different question at the end of the session. Thank you. Welcome to my presentation. Konnichiwa, McCallum desu. I'm going to give a brief introduction about myself before I start, because it will show you where I'm coming from. I've been asked to speak to you today because as a past international player and coaching at representative levels, it's my view on what I think perception of women's rugby is today and where it will be in the next 5 years leading up to 2016 2016 Olympics. My history as a rugby player: I played 8 years for Canada, 4 of which I captained through 2 World Cups, 2002 in Barcelona, Spain, and 2006 in Edmonton, Canada. As well as a player, ex-player, and a captain, I have also coached for the last 16 years. I started my coaching in Vancouver, British Columbia, where I'm from. We then moved on to London, England, where I played for the Richmond Premiership team there and coached their development side and youth team. From there, we moved on to Sydney, Australia, where for 3 years I coached the Sydney University and played for them. And which brings us to today, where we live here in Tokyo, Japan. My husband is also a professional rugby coach, hence why we've been moving around the world. And I'm coaching the Japan Academy team. It's a team that's come together by the Japan Rugby Union and Japan Olympic Committee to create a team that's going to represent Japan in the 2016 Olympic Games in Rio de Janeiro. I'm going to talk to you today about Olympic women's rugby, the new rugby athlete, and the new athletes that are actually transferring over to play women's rugby, and with the perceptions that they have coming from their sports, will it change women's rugby perceptions? Just a minute, please. What you'll see here in the video that's about to happen is Sevens rugby. Sevens rugby is a shortened version of the 15s game. 14 minutes of fast-paced athleticism, and these athletes need stamina, speed, endurance, and strength to complete the game. These elements that you'll find in these athletes that you'll see are also found in other sports like soccer, track and field, and handball, and the rugby unions are starting to look towards these sports to try and transfer them over to rugby sevens that can represent other countries in the Olympics. All right, I'll just go to the next slide. That's okay. That's okay.
And while we are waiting, I can tell you that this conference offers much more in terms of female football. And tomorrow, 11:30, and also on Saturday, 11:30, there will be presentations about Finnish, Norwegian, Ireland, Germany and New Zealand players from Luutanen, Chenga, Ombaichi, Martinez Lagunas and Hewitt. So there's really something to look forward to.
Okay, sorry, we're not going to see the video. It's fast action though. On October 2009, the International Olympic Committee voted rugby in sevens as Olympic sport in Rio de Janeiro in 2016. 1924 was the last time rugby featured in the Olympics, and 87 years later it is now being featured again as the shortened version, and in the women's and the men's. In the women's game, sevens rugby is so underdeveloped that countries are starting to see women's rugby as, so to speak, a soft medal. So they're trying to get the top athletes in each country to represent their country in women's sevens to hopefully contend for a medal. Women's rugby, a clearly perceived masculine sport, was first categorized as an unacceptable sport in Methony's sport model in 1965. The sport was, there's 3 broad categories based upon people's impression on whether the sport was acceptable or unacceptable for females. For a sport to be considered unacceptable, it had to contain physical contact and face-to-face opposition. In 2001, Kovola revolutionized the research to describe these categories as masculine, gender-neutral, and feminine. Rugby fell, 46 years ago, rugby fell into the masculine category, and it's still there today. With the inclusion of the Olympics in 2016, we're hoping that rugby goes from a masculine identity to a neutral one. There are a number of factors that can affect the changing perception of women's rugby, funding being one, media coverage, and the neutral sport athletes that are transferring over. I'm going to focus today on the neutral sport athletes, and with a little focus on funding and media coverage, but today it's going to be predominantly about the new athletes transferring over. Sports like touch rugby, volleyball, and soccer are producing athletes that are coming over and making a huge impact on women's rugby, as seen here. In the Women's World Cup 2010 last year, 60% of the top try scorers had 3 years less experience. 80% of those athletes had other international sport experience. That's huge when you're considering that this is going to be Olympic sport in 2016. A great example of this is Nicole Beck. Nicole Beck is an international touch player for Australia. And at the tail end of my coaching in Sydney University, I got asked by the captain to come out and help coach the new touch girls how to tackle. So that was 2009. I went out to training and there was Nicole Beck and another international touch girl. And I went over to them and I taught some basic technique tackling. And when I asked Nicole Beck, I said, oh, are you starting to think about coming over to 15s after your international touch experience? And she said, well, to be quite honest, I've been selected for the Australian sevens team that's competing in the World Qualifiers in 2 months' time. So here's a girl that was touch experienced, no contact whatsoever, and the coach actually selected her to represent Australia. Sure enough, she scored the winning try against New Zealand in the World Cup qualifier to win. 2 months later, Nicole Beck was quoted in the Australian saying, I'm still learning the rules. Getting tackled is not so bad, but trying to make tackles is difficult. Exactly 1 year later,
there she goes, past the 15, but it's the covering winger, I think, who makes this excellent kick.
Look at that. Pocock absolutely flat there by Nicole Beck.
Hey, she won't mind that. She made 50 metres first, but what a wonderful tackle.
so that's Nicole Beck. 1 year before, she was saying that she didn't know how to tackle. Top athlete, picking up the skills really quickly. My research in this presentation was a questionnaire that I handed out to the IRB and to the top national coaches around the world. There was 2 reasons why I conducted this research. One, from a coaching perspective, and 2, I wanted to see what sports top coaches were selecting to represent their country. My goals for this research were how to see how elite coaches actually perceived women's sevens at the moment, and whether or not these sports were in the gender-neutral category. The questionnaire was distributed among 35 of the top national, international coaches.